First, there was football. Then, there was fantasy football. Now, there's Fantasy Football Goon with Goon and Tooch.
Fantasy Football Goon with Goon and Tooch. Fantasy Football Goon with Goon and Tooch. Fantasy Football Goon with Goon and Tooch. Fantasy Football Goon with Goon and Tooch. Fantasy Football Goon.
Touchdown.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Goon podcast. Fantasy Football Goon is a part of the Bears Barroom Radio Network. I'm your host, Joe Mandel, the Goon, and joining me as always is my co-host and buddy, John Santucci. Tooch, what's going on, bud? You ready to talk about the NFC South?
Oh, yeah, this is a great division too, Joe. I'm doing great. NFC South got a lot of fantasy stars.
Yeah, there's a lot of fantasy points to be had in this division, and man, oh man, I'm going to draft a lot of these guys, I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, lots of good targets, Joe.
Oh, no doubt about it. And we'll quickly run through our format again real quick. So we're going to talk about blue chip players, which are fantasy studs, guys that you need to draft 100% no matter what. Then we're going to talk about good bets, guys who are probably going to do pretty good for you. Some sleepers, some guys that are, no one's talking about, but they're probably going to do pretty good, or they have a chance to do pretty good. And then we're going to talk about rookies to watch, defensive outlook, and strength of schedule. So with that said, John, let's jump into the first team on our list, and we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons.
Oh, yeah. So when you're talking Falcons, it all goes through one guy, right, Joe? And that's Matt Ryan.
That's right.
Matty Ice, over 4,000 yards last year.
Yeah.
Only had 20 touchdowns, though, Joe. It was a little down year for him as far as the touchdowns. Still, Matt's a solid player. 12 interceptions. He's got to be able. I think he's going to improve on that 20 touchdowns. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. He had a lot of interceptions last year and wasn't quite as accurate. Julio Jones couldn't quite get going as much last season. So with that said, I think he's going to turn that around. I think that total gets closer to 30 this year.
Yeah, last year's season they were hanging over from the Super Bowl loss the year before.
Yeah,
still managed to make the playoffs though. So when you talk about the Falcons too, they're one big stud who's kind of a holdout risk right now. There's holdout rumors, Joe, and that's Julio Jones. What do you know about the holdout rumors?
Well, originally it was reported that Julio Jones was not going to report to camp, but it looks like now he is. So I'm in a bit of a confusing situation. Not exactly sure what's going on. He said he was never going to hold out during training camp, but someone's telling a story here, and I don't know who it is.
Right, he still had a solid year last year. I know he missed a couple games with injury, with a foot injury. I think still finished with over 1,400 yards receiving. Only had 3 touchdowns, though, Joe, but, he's still one of the top receivers in the game.
Yeah, he's great, and to clarify a little more about his contract situation, what the Falcons did is they converted some of his base salary for 2019 into a bonus for 2018. So basically that's approximately $2 million. So Julio Jones got a little extra money, and I'm assuming that's why he reported to camp.
I still think he's probably a first-round draft pick, Joe.
Yeah, Julio's a first-rounder. He's probably going to go in the middle of the first round just because of the volume that comes his way and his potential. Wouldn't be surprised to see him go even earlier if he has a great preseason, but I have no problem taking him in the middle to late first round.
Right, and then another guy you got to think who's always really solid is Devontae Freeman. Not as good a numbers this past season. Still had 8 touchdowns on the year. Didn't get to 1,000 yards, had 7 touchdowns rushing. Only 1 touchdown receiving, only 36 catches as he split time with Tevin Coleman.
For sure, Devontae's going to be a number 1 running back for you. There's no doubt about that. I expect that yardage to probably go up a little bit this year, but I'm not sure if he's going to have more than 7 touchdowns. But again, you're going to get Devontae Freeman for his ability and for his pass-catching skills, because he's going to catch at least 30 balls, probably have around 300 yards receiving, and maybe a couple receiving scores. So Devontae is a solid number 1 running back that I have no problem putting on my squad. But with that said, John, let me ask you a question. One of our Twitter followers sent us a question. They're in a keeper league with an auction draft, and he has to keep 3 guys. So he's got Kirk Cousins on the cheap and Stephon Diggs on the cheap. So obviously those are two guys you're going to keep. But he also has Devontae Freeman, but he's got a $200 budget, and it would cost him $57 to keep Freeman. Would you keep him?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I don't know. I might lean towards trying to pick up one of these new rookie running backs and maybe spend the money elsewhere.
Yeah, that's what I told him, John. I told him that I'd rather see you spend your money on a Saquon Barkley or one of the other new backs in the league. I feel like that's a little too steep for Freeman at this point, but if you really want him, you could pay. I just wouldn't be that guy.
Yeah, I think you could probably get two good players for that price. That's just what I'm thinking.
Yeah, no doubt. When you're talking about a quarter of your salary for one guy, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a little rich for me too, Joe.
Let's move into the good bets section. Falcons have a lot of good bets on their squad, and the Falcons are another team, John, that kicks inside a dome. So, that's why we love Matt Bryant as a kicker. Always one of the first kickers to go off the board. Last year, he had 34 field goals. He was 8 of 9 from 50-plus yards. Again, that tells you that he kicks in a dome. So that's absolutely incredible for a fantasy kicker.
Yeah, 34 field goals, too. That's almost 2 a game, like Gostkowski. So, he's a good bet. You know, one of the best kickers to grab. He's got a few years left in him. I know he's getting up there, though, Joe. He's in his 40s now, I think.
Yeah, Matt Bryant is, the ageless wonder. He just continues to perform year after year, and he's just getting it done, man. This guy, and I just looked it up, John. This guy is 43 years old.
Yeah, it's amazing. He's something else, man. He's just like a throwback to those guys, with Morton Anderson and Gary Anderson. Those are the two guys I'm thinking of.
Oh, man.
Same division, too. Gary Anderson on the Falcons, and, I play on the Steelers, too, I think, and Morton Anderson on the Saints.
Yeah, these are some great old players that just kind of continue to dominate into their later years. But a guy who's not quite that old, but a little bit of a seasoned veteran. We're talking about Mohamed Sanu, also a good bet here. Last year, he had a high number of receptions, 67 catches, 703 yards, and 5 scores. So for a guy that you got the last couple rounds of your draft, he performed as a really good number 3 wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm almost positive he was in those last 2 or 3 rounds last season for us in our work draft. But I had to go back and look at his numbers. It's 67 catches, 700 yards, 5 touchdowns. So, not bad for a fill-in receiver, to have on your bench. Yeah, they do have a rookie, though, Joe, so may eat into some of Sanu's catches. So we'll talk about him in the rookie section.
Yeah, for sure. I think it will eat into his numbers, but still draft Sanu as a number 3 guy. I think it's worth it, especially late. But another guy here in the good bets is the counterpart to Devontae Freeman. We're talking here about Tevin Coleman. Last year, 628 yards, not all that different from Freeman. 5 touchdowns, 27 catches, and 299 yards receiving with 3 receiving scores. So Tevin Coleman had 8 total touchdowns last year for a guy that's probably going in the middle rounds of a draft, and that's pretty darn good, man. That's a great value pick.
Yeah, just like Freeman, he also had 8 touchdowns. That's kind of one of the reasons, or that's one of the reasons why we didn't recommend Freeman for 50 or $60, just because he splits time with Tevin Coleman, and for 50, $60, you want a guy that's going to be, the main focal point of the run game. So, yeah, but Tevin Coleman, a good bench option.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So keep your eyes on Tevin Coleman. But also, John, we have another good bet here. He's a guy that you were pretty high on as a bye week replacement last year. Talk to us a little bit about Austin Hooper.
Yeah, he had some good weeks and he would disappear for a little while, but maybe this year I feel like he's going to have a better season this year. I remember against the Bears, he had an 88-yard touchdown catch. So,
oh my God, yeah. Somehow he got by everyone.
There was a blown coverage there, but last year, 49 catches, over 500 yards, and 3 touchdowns. It's not bad. If he can improve on that, man, he could be a really good bet for a tight end, second tight end, maybe even a guy who's going to push into that starting tight end for you on your fantasy squad.
Yeah, for me, he's a backup tight end, and if he turns into more, that's a plus. but I have no problem drafting him late towards the end of your draft. But we do have some sleepers on this squad, John, and we're talking about Justin Hardy. Last year, 20 receptions, 221 yards, and 3 scores. He's also a kick returner, so if you're in a league where you get points for return yards, that's definitely someone that you want to draft.
Yeah, to go back, I remember him. 3 touchdowns. Like, who's this guy? If he can force his way into, some more receptions. More. So anything happens to Sanu or Jones, Justin Hardy is someone to keep an eye on. But again, they do have this new rookie, Joe, and the rookie is smooth.
The rookie is very smooth, and I think that's a great segue. So right now, we'll keep Justin Hardy as a sleeper guy to monitor on waivers. But the next guy coming up, we're drafting him. So we're talking about Calvin Ridley. He was in Alabama last season, 63 catches, 967 yards, and 5 scores on an Alabama team that was absolutely stacked already. So I imagine Ridley is going to fit really well in this offense. The guy's really fast, and he's going to be a great counterpart to Julio Jones. So I think this kid's going to be a fantasy stud. I put his ceiling as a number 2 wide receiver. He's going to have some weeks with the points of a number 1 guy if he can stay healthy, John.
Yeah, I compare him like his floor to like a Sterling Shepard, Joe. That's he's opposite Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, and Sterling Shepard's opposite Odell.
Yeah.
So this is the chance for him to kind of have that. He's only a rookie. He hasn't done anything in the NFL yet, but this could be a chance for him to have a kind of Sterling Shepard type, 60 catches, 700 yards, half a dozen scores. They also have Matt Ryan throwing in the ball, so he's definitely a player that will be drafted, and definitely a player for people to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and everyone keeps asking me, where do you draft Calvin Ridley? And I think it's a bit of a tough question, especially if you're in a PPR league, because you don't know what kind of volume this kid's going to get with Julio on the team. But with that said, I still think he's worth drafting in all leagues, probably around the 6th or 7th round. He may go earlier depending on his preseason, but I don't have a problem taking him in the middle rounds of your draft because I think he's going to end up being a fantasy stud, and I think he's going to finish the year as a top 25 wide receiver.
Yeah, he's going to be definitely one of the better rookies, although Anthony Miller in Bears camp, Joe, is looking mighty good. I think him and Calvin Ridley are both going to be top performers, rookie wide receivers this year. The defense, it's an ascending defense for Atlanta. They're improving. I liked them last year. It's just that they play in this division. There's some high-powered offenses, Joe. They'll chucking the ball around. You have New Orleans, Tampa Bay throws a lot. Carolina's got Cam Newton. So these are, this NFC South, like we said, has got a lot of fantasy stars.
Yeah.
I like the Atlanta defense. They have a defensive-minded head coach. And if that defense takes a step up, it's just going to give Matt Ryan and guys like Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones more opportunities, So Atlanta is I think it's a draftable defense.
Yeah, they had a lot of good games last year, and Dan Quinn is really working to get that defense even better. And as well as their defense, their special teams is looking to improve as well. They had an okay season last year, but I look for that special teams to take a step forward. And they have a fairly hard schedule, but, these things, if you're in the middle of the pack I think they're number 13 for toughest schedule. So they're kind of in the middle of the pack there. So I don't have a problem drafting the Atlanta defense, especially if you are drafting 2 defenses. If you have them as a second defense, I think that's a pretty good move because they're going to have some great weeks. But let's move on to our next team here, John. And let's talk about the Carolina Panthers. Tell me a little bit about their blue chip players.
Like Atlanta goes through their quarterback, and Carolina's got Cam Newton.
Yeah.
And, he had a really good year last year, too. 3,000 yards passing, 22 touchdowns, threw a lot of picks. Of course, was getting it done with his legs, too. Not, he's not as much a runner as when he was younger. He's got some weapons now. New Orleans is the team to beat in this division, I think, Joe. I think you'll agree.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, Atlanta's tough, so Carolina and Tampa Bay, they got their work cut out for them with those 2 other teams. Draftable, I'm going to say maybe mid-round, maybe a little bit ahead of the middle rounds. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's where he's going to go, and people are going to look at his rushing ability as another reason to grab him. Cam Newton's is an interesting guy.
Yeah.
For me, he's been a roller coaster ride of a fantasy player the last few years, but you know, if you're looking for a guy with a ton of potential that you're going to be able to get in the middle rounds, he's your guy. He does have a great weapon here in Devin Funchess, who really took a step forward once he finally became the guy after Kelvin Benjamin departed last year. 63 catches, 840 yards, and 8 scores. So Funchess is a big target, and he's been very consistent over his last couple years. He took a big step forward last year, so that's why we have him here as a blue chip player.
Yeah, I had him last year, Joe. I think I drafted him late.
Yeah, you did.
In double-digit rounds, and I'm like, this guy's a starting wide receiver. I think I drafted him as like a third or fourth wide receiver. I was surprised to find I had a number one receiver in that slot, you know, so...
Yeah.
He moved his way up to like my number one or number two receiver,
especially after all your injuries, John.
Yeah, so I was quite happy with his performance last year, and I think he's just gonna, where he was at with 63 catches, 840 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I think that's gonna be his floor, somewhere around there, and that he's got a chance to catch 70 or 80 balls, then maybe 1,000 yards and 8 to 10 touchdowns. So with Devin Funchess, though, I mean, he does have one guy coming back that's going to take some of his catches, though. Although as we found out last show, Kelvin Benjamin is gone. So,
right.
But Greg Olson's back. He missed most of the season. What's your outlook for Greg Olson? He's getting up there in years. Still have a lot left in the tank. What do you think?
I still think he's got a lot left in the tank. As long as he can keep that ankle healthy. I believe it was a broken ankle last year or something along those lines. And I know those are hard injuries to overcome. But if he's fully healthy, Greg Olson is going to be a beast. He's a top 5 tight end when healthy because Cam looks his way often. Now, last year's numbers are very skewed because I think he only played in 2 or 3 games. But 17 catches, just under 200 yards, and 1 score. I think Greg Olson is going to be healthy this year. I think he's going to have about 850 yards receiving and probably around 6 touchdowns. So Greg Olson is a top 5 tight end, and I would draft him as such.
Yeah, so coming back off the injury, I'm going to say he's probably going to go 6th round area around there. Maybe 5th, maybe 7th. There aren't a lot of tight ends, so yeah, you're right. He may be in the middle rounds, but maybe in the higher rounds there. But definitely could be a number 1 tight end.
Yeah, that's what I like from Greg Olson. He was great on the Bears, and he's great on the Panthers. Now let's move on into the good bets section. And John, let's talk a little bit about your guy Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I had him last year in 80 catches, Joe. That's 5 catches a game. Jonathan Stewart is gone. He departs for the Giants. It's Christian McCaffrey's job, right, Joe? What do you think?
He's the lead dog there, man. He's going to get the lion's share of the carries, and I'm excited to see what he can do.
Yeah, I am too. And, he could turn into a blue chip player, number 1 or first round draft pick. We know he can catch the ball out of the backfield, so hopefully maybe he becomes a complete back. Don't think he'll get as drafted as high as he did last year, although, last year was overdrafted, and I think this season he might be underdrafted, Joe.
Yeah, I think so too. I really do.
I just think people are going to be like, he couldn't run the ball last year. I'll say he's probably a 3rd running back or a 2nd running back, on your squad, but, he's got a high ceiling now. By all accounts, he's in great shape. And
have you seen his pictures, John? Have you seen them?
I haven't, though, Joe. I heard he's ripped.
Yeah, this guy looks like the Incredible Hulk now. It's going to be, I think, a big year for him.
See, that's all good news. So keep an eye on Christian McCaffrey this season. Definitely draft him. I'm going to say 4th, 5th round for him, Joe.
Yeah, I'm comfortable doing that for sure.
Yeah, all right. So other good bet is Graham Gano, field goal kicker, who's middle of the pack field goal kicker, 29 to 30 field goals. Doesn't really have a big long leg, but 30 field goals, that's almost 2 a game.
Yeah, it's nothing to shake a stick at. So yeah, if you're getting a kicker in the last round, Graham Gano, nothing wrong with that. But moving into the sleeper section now, John. Torrey Smith coming over now to the Panthers. They have a nice deep threat to go along with Devin Funchess. That should be really nice. He had a bit of a down season last year. 36 catches, 430 yards, only scored twice. But Torrey Smith adds a nice dimension to this wide receiving core.
Yeah, he's a veteran wideout. He was on the Super Bowl champion Eagles last year. 36 receptions, only 2 touchdowns. Maybe new life in Carolina. Probably a late round draft pick, Joe. And I'm a little more excited about the rookie wideout. We'll talk about him in a second.
Yeah, so I'm leaving Torrey Smith undrafted unless he's a guy I'm going to watch for on waivers. But the next guy, rookie DJ Moore out of Maryland. Last year in college, 80 catches, over 1,000 yards, and 8 scores. This kid was an absolute stud. I think he's going to make a big splash in fantasy this year.
Yeah, really good route runner. Same school, Stephon Diggs. Reminds people a lot of Stephon Diggs. And I think with Anthony Miller and Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore is going to be right there with productive rookies in fantasy. So definitely someone to watch. 80 catches last year and 8 touchdowns, man. That's a pretty good season. But we'll see. Definitely watch him in the preseason and see where he's at, see how he's connecting with Cam Newton. But maybe he'll move into that second wideout spot ahead of Torrey Smith, Joe, and that's what I'm thinking might happen by the end of the season.
Yeah, I think so. I think Moore is way more talented than Torrey Smith, but I guess only time will tell on that one. But we do have another rookie to watch here, and we're talking about Ian Thomas.
Yeah, he's the heir to Greg Olsen, tight end, fast. 25 catches, 376 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So they let Ed Dixon go, and Greg Olsen coming back from injury. And then when Greg Olsen hangs it up, Ian Thomas might be the tight end of the future for the Panthers. So definitely keep an eye on this kid. He's got some potential, Joe.
Yes, he does. And if Olsen goes down, you're looking at a top 10 tight end. So keep your eye on Ian Thomas, and more importantly, keep your eye on Greg Olsen's injury status, and that will tell you the value of Ian Thomas. We're moving on to the defensive outlook for the Panthers. They've got a pretty good defense, and they have one of the best middle linebackers in all of football. I'm talking about Luke Kuechly.
Yeah, they're a good defense, and the defense is pretty much what got them into the playoffs last year. They played really tough defense. I think there'll still be a good defense this year, Joe, though, like we said, they're playing in a tough division with a lot of scoring. Still, though, they're on the upper half of teams in the league as far as defenses go. Might take a step back this year, but still, I think a draftable defense, Joe.
Yeah, anytime you got Luke Kuechly on your team, you're a draftable defense for sure. But
yeah,
their strength of schedule, they have a fairly tough schedule. I think they have number 12 overall in terms of a fairly tough schedule. But
yeah.
we don't really know what to expect from this team. They have a couple new rookies. They've got Greg Olsen coming back, so they're a wait and see for me in terms of where they finish in the division. But I think we all know the division belongs to the next team we're going to talk about, and we're talking about the New Orleans Saints with a boatload of blue chip players, John.
Yeah, they're loaded, Joe. I think this is their division to lose. Atlanta will give them a good battle, but man, they're so loaded, and like the other two teams we've already talked about, the offense goes through Drew Brees, Joe.
It does, and he's back. He signed a deal to stay with the Saints. Drew Brees last year, over 4,000 yards passing, 23 scores through the air, only 8 interceptions, and he had 2 rushing TDs for the old guy. So Drew Brees is a blue chip quarterback. He is definitely worth an early draft pick. I imagine Drew Brees will probably go in end of the second, maybe end of the third round, somewhere in between there.
Yeah, I'm thinking 3rd or 4th round for Drew. I think he went in the 3rd round last year. A lot of drafts, Joe, but the guy I'm going to be targeting this year is his number 1 receiver, and this guy I think is going to take a step up. I think Mike Evans of the Buccaneers was the big dog receiver, and Julio Jones the big dog receiver. Michael Thomas is going to be the big dog receiver in this division, Joe.
Yeah, he really is. He put up big dog numbers last year with 104 catches, 1,245 yards, and 5 scores. So he had big dog numbers last year. I think his touchdown count's going to go up. The yardage might go down a smidge, but overall, Michael Thomas is a big bad boy.
Yeah, I think he's going to go up. By all accounts, he's in a lot better shape than last year. He's worked on his footwork, his route running, his hand strength. I think he's going to improve on these numbers, at least the touchdowns. 100 receptions, Joe. Number 1 draft pick territory.
Yeah,
first round pick.
It definitely is. And the funny thing is he's probably going to go in the second round just because he doesn't have the name recognition of all the other guys. I think in a 12-man league, he'll go in the first round. If you're in a 10-man league, he will probably go early second round. But he's worth it wherever you get him.
Yeah, I'm comfortable taking him in the first round if I'm at the back half of the round, back half of the picks. The big dog running backs have already gone. I'm fine with taking him in the end of the first round. I just think he's going to have that good of a season. But and the next guy, what do you think? Is he a first-round draft pick too, Joe?
I don't know if he's a first-rounder yet. He's pretty darn close. But we're talking about Alvin Kamara. Had a very impressive rookie year. 728 yards rushing, 8 scores, 81 catches, 826 yards receiving, and 5 touchdowns through the air. So I don't know if you're counting there, John, but that's 13 total touchdowns.
Yeah, he was amazing, and he did get drafted in our league, I think, right, Joe? I think someone took him the end of the, in the double-digit rounds, and they really got a number 1 back there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they have 2 number 1 backs on this squad with Mark Ingram as well. 1,124 yards rushing, 12 scores, 58 receptions, 416 yards, and 0 receiving touchdowns. But if I had to pick between Kamara and Ingram, man, it's pretty darn close. But I think I'm taking Kamara, especially if you're in a PPR league.
I'm taking Kamara too, especially because Mark Ingram is going to miss the first couple games of the season as he's suspended.
That's true. Yes, for sure. And keep in mind,
he's out the first 2 games, right, Joe?
Yes, he's out for the first 2 games of the season.
PEDs, right?
Yeah, he's got a PED suspension.
So yeah, and Mark Ingram is an older player, been in the league a while. Alvin Kamara is a younger player, and I really like Alvin Kamara this season. I like a lot of people on this New Orleans Saints offense, Joe. I even like their defense. We'll talk about them later too. But I'm taking Kamara over Ingram. And last year, I think when people were drafting, Mark Ingram was kind of like an afterthought. I don't know why, but he had a solid season the year before. Ended up getting picked kind of in the middle, maybe the earlier 6th, 7th round, 8th round.
Yeah. And,
he's still paid off. 12 touchdowns on the ground. So, and 58 catches. So PPR, both him and Kamara are good in PPR. So, I'm taking Kamara. I think Kamara will have a better season this year. And Ingram will still be solid. But, again, you're only getting him for 10, 12 games.
For sure. And to clarify a little bit about my comments about Alvin Kamara, I think he's a first-round pick in a PPR league, but he's a second-round pick in non-PPR.
Yeah, that's a good call.
But time to move into the good bets section. They have quite a handful of good bets on the Saints, but let's talk a little bit about Will Lutz, their kicker. 34 kicks last year, 13 of 16 from 40 to 49 yards, and 4 of 5 from 50+. And where does Will Lutz kick, John?
Yeah, in the Dome.
He does. He kicks in the Mercedes Superdome.
Yep, and I targeted him last year, and I went to draft a kicker, and somebody had already grabbed him. Because I knew he was going to have a good season with that high-powered Saints offense, and couldn't get him. But this year, he's going to do just fine. Look at those numbers, Joe. It's almost two field goals a game. He's good from long distance, as you can see. Over 40 yards. He's like 17 and 21. So not bad.
No, not at all. And another guy who's not bad is Ted Ginn Jr. Had a season that exceeded everyone's expectations last year. 53 catches for nearly 800 yards and 4 scores. He's a bit of a deep threat that sometimes catches a case of the dropsies, but he had a great season last year.
Yeah, I had him on my team. Never seemed to start him on the correct week though. He was kind of like an every other game player for me.
Mm-hmm.
Second year in this offense for him could mean good things are ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. And there's a lot of other threats that might open things up for him. So Ted Ginn Jr., a great mid to late round pick. So keep an eye on him. And let's talk a little bit about the last guy on our good bets, John. And he's a guy that always is someone you bring up, and you always usually get him on your squad at some point in the season. But tell us a little bit about Ben Watson.
Yeah, I had to go back and look at his numbers. He had 61 catches in Baltimore. Guy's 37 years old. 61 catches, 4 touchdowns, over 500 yards. Not bad. This year he's going to be with New Orleans and Drew Brees instead of Joe Flacco and the Ravens. Hey, he could have another solid season, Joe. That's why I put him in the good bet section. But they also have Josh Hill. We'll talk about him a little bit, depending on which tight end's going to emerge. I think it'll be Ben Watson, though, Joe.
Yeah, there's a handful of guys to choose from, but Watson's got the pedigree, so keep an eye on him there. And they actually have a former Bears receiver that left here and went over to New Orleans. We're talking about Cameron Meredith. So he was a great receiver when he was here in Chicago until he got hurt. But in 2016, he had 66 catches, 888 yards, and 4 scores. So Cameron Meredith is definitely someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and they have some good wide receivers. We'll talk about a few of these other guys that are also fighting for time with Meredith. And yeah, Cameron Meredith, of course, coming off that bad knee injury. Have to see how he is. The Bears were fine letting him go. Of course, they had other plans at wide receivers we talked about in our NFC North show. But Cameron Meredith has some potential with Drew Brees now, and he's good out of the slot. So we'll see. It's definitely you'll have to monitor these wide receivers, Joe.
Yeah, we definitely will, and there's a lot of guys there, and we'll see what happens. But they also have Josh Hill at tight end, who's had, kind of the sneaky guy that always steals a touchdown. He's the guy that kind of stole touchdowns from Coby Fleener before he was let go. But 16 catches, 165 yards, 1 score last year. But, he's got a lot of potential. He just finds a way to get open.
Yeah, he does. And, anything happens to Ben Watson, Josh Hill's more than capable of filling in. But these other wide receivers that are over here, I'm going to list. One of the kids we have he's a second-year player to watch. Didn't play last year. He's from a local kid from Northwestern University. He had 90 catches, 1,247 yards, and 12 touchdowns in 2016 for the Wildcats.
Wow.
And by all accounts, the Saints and Sean Payton are high on this kid. He's listed as a starting slot receiver. So he's listed ahead of Cam Meredith. That's why I listed him as a player to watch. And then, of course, they have a rookie, Joe, and this was a kid I like coming out. Traquan Smith out of University of Central Florida. 59 catches, almost 1,200 yards. He averaged almost 20 yards a catch, Joe.
Wow.
13 touchdowns. So this is a kid who's fast. He's got great hands. He's big. He's about 6'3". So you got to keep an eye on this kid. Of course, there are a lot of receivers there. Was a third-round pick of the Saints. Keep your eye on Traquan Smith, too, as you're looking over these wide receivers. You got Traquan Smith, Austin Carr, Cameron Meredith, and Ted Ginn Jr. all fighting to play opposite of Michael Thomas.
Yeah, this team is stacked, John, and they also have a very stacked defense. They were unbelievable last year. 42 sacks, 20 interceptions. And their special teams was very good, too, with 1 touchdown. And the only thing dragging this Saints team down right now, John, is their schedule. They have a very tough schedule. I think they are number 2 of the hardest schedules in all of football. So the Saints, if they're going to make the playoffs and make a playoff run, they're going to have to keep it going from the get-go.
Yeah, for sure. It's still a defense I really like, and they worked on their defense too in the draft. So looking for pass rush with their first-round pick. I still like this defense though, Joe. I think it's ascending still. The schedule's tough, but I think they'll be okay, Joe. It's probably a defense I'm still going to target.
Yeah, the Saints defense is unbelievable, and you're going to draft him no matter what. So There's no way around that. Let's move into our next and final team, and we're talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're blue chip players. One of them is Jameis Winston, but he's going to be serving a suspension, John.
Right, which means that Ryan Fitzpatrick will start the season, right, Joe?
Yes, it is, and if you're in daily fantasy leagues, that is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and Jameis, for all his troubles last season, he still had over 3,500 yards, only 19 touchdowns with 11 interceptions. Seemed to throw a lot of picks, and he's got to work on his accuracy, Joe. He's just hasn't been the most accurate passer. Still has a lot of potential. His best target took a little bit of a step back because of Jameis' struggles. And I'm talking about Mike Evans, Joe.
Yeah, and the season before he was absolutely unbelievable, but took a bit of a step back last year. Still had 71 catches, just over 1,000 yards, and 5 scores. So it's kind of funny that we're saying that he took a step back, but we all know the talent that Mike Evans has. I expect him to do better this year, and hopefully Winston can get things under control.
Yeah, I think he will do better, Joe. I think they might have a running game this year. Now we'll talk about that in the rookie section. I think that's going to help Mike Evans. They lacked the running game last year, going with the mixed bag of running backs, the muscle hamster, and Jacquizz Rodgers, and Charles Sims. I think that's a revolving door of mediocre running backs. Peyton Barber was in there too, but this year I think they're going to have a good running game, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Let's move into our good bets section here, and here's a tight end, John, that you and I talked a lot about last year, and we're talking about Cameron Brate. We weren't sure how he was going to fit in with O.J. Howard, but sure enough, he was the lead dog at tight end, and they went ahead and signed him to an extension. So last year, 48 catches, almost 600 yards, and 6 touchdowns for a guy that went super late in the draft. So I think Cameron Brate's going to take a step forward this year. He is basically the guy after they gave him that contract, and I think that he's got great chemistry with Jameis Winston.
Yeah, it's a bit of a head-scratcher after drafting O.J. Howard the first round last year. But, Brate is good, man. Local kid, went to high school in Naperville, had 6 touchdowns, man. But, Howard had 6 touchdowns also, so I imagine they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets. But I still like Brate as the better tight end option here. He just seems to have a knack for getting open and runs great routes. O.J. Howard has a ton of potential, though, so it's definitely you have to monitor that. But both tight ends, an injury to either one of them, and either one of them would be a good starting tight end.
We got a lot of guys to talk about a tight end, but they have another number 2 wide receiver that he battled injury, but he's been kind of up and down throughout the year, and I'm talking about DeSean Jackson. Last year, 50 catches, 668 yards, and 3 scores. I think if he can have a fully healthy season, and if Jameis can get his shit together, I think that DeSean Jackson becomes a viable number 3 wide receiver with the upside to be a 2.
Yeah, for an injured season, 50 catches, 3 touchdowns, not terrible. Make a good 3rd or 4th receiver on your squad. I expect his numbers to go up a little bit though as a second year at this offense. But they do have some young receivers, in our sleeper section, Joe.
Yeah, they do, and they had Adam Humphries, who had a very good year last year. 61 catches, 631 yards, but his touchdown count wasn't there. He only had 1. But I think that's going to go up this year. He had a very good year, and I think with Winston coming back, he's really working on his field vision. And Adam Humphries was left wide open quite a few times last season, John.
Yeah, 61 catches. I had to go back and double take on that one. I did double take. 61 catches, 631 yards. They also got another young receiver. This will be his 2nd year. Is Chris Godwin from Penn State, who he's got some potential. Good route runner, good hands, sneaky fast. So it's another kid to keep an eye on, Joe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Obviously, they have a kicker here that you want to keep your eyes on. We're talking about Chandler Catanzaro. We had accidentally in a previous edition mentioned that he was the kicker for the Jets, but he is indeed the kicker for the Buccaneers. 25 field goals last year, 2 of 2 from 50 plus. He's a good guy to get on your squad, so if you're getting him in the last round, we have no problem with that. And they do have a rookie to watch this year, John. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Ronald Jones?
Right. Cairo Santos is the kicker on the Jets now, Joe. Just wanted to throw that in there. But,
Okay.
Yeah. Ronald Jones, man. The kid I was talking about who should take. I know Jacquizz Rodgers is listed as a starter. I don't think that'll last long. But Ronald Jones, 1,550 yards, 19 touchdowns rushing. Also had 14 catches and a touchdown at USC last year. So this is a kid the Bears were entertaining the thought of picking, I think, rumored to like Ronald Jones. But yeah, this kid, I think, this is a guy I think is very draftable, Joe. I think this is the guy who's going to be carrying the rock in Tampa Bay, who's going to help guys like Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson and Cameron Brate and Adam Humphries. You know, if Tampa Bay gets a stud running back, Joe, their fantasy potential to me goes up.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I think Ronald Jones is going to have a great place in this offense. So he's a great late round pick that could have a huge effect on fantasy this season. So if you're in keeper leagues, he's definitely a guy to grab. And, you know, if he gets the opportunity, he could do a lot here.
Could have like a Dalvin Cook season, Joe, I'm thinking. They're kind of similar players.
Yeah, you know? Yeah, they are. And I think if he gets that opportunity, it very well could happen. But they do also have an improved defense. They added quite a few guys, Jason Pierre-Paul, Vinny Curry.
Yeah, they added those two pass rushers, Jason Pierre-Paul and Vinny Curry, you know, to rush the passer, and drafted a big man in the middle, and Vita Vea. So I think that front seven, you know, they still have some good linebackers too, Joe, and their defense, I think, is going to be improved. I think they're draftable. They'll probably go undrafted because they do play in that tough division. They do have a hard schedule, but the defense, I think, is one that you want to watch maybe towards the end of the year, or as a streaming defense or a bye week defense. I think the Buccaneers are going to find some value there on that defense, Joe.
Yeah, for sure, especially in daily fantasy and as a backup defense. These guys are much improved and could do a lot for you. But they have a really tough schedule, John. I think they have the number 4 toughest schedule in the league. So keep those expectations in check, but they do have an improved defense that I think is going to do a lot here. But we did get through this entire division, John. We made it. Before we check out here, I wanted to mention for all of our listeners out there, if you guys are interested in hosting your draft party here in Chicago, we're going to have Fantasy Football Goon draft parties at Vintage Lounge, and that's at 1449 West Taylor Street, Chicago, Illinois. That's 60607. I will be there, as well as if you book your draft, you're also going to get a draft kit with a draft board and stickers. You can get a bag of Fantasy Football Goon swag. There's going to be drinks and food specials, so definitely keep your eye on that. So if you're interested in booking your fantasy draft at Vintage Lounge, make sure you call 312-526-3647, extension 2. So book your draft party at Vintage Lounge and come and visit the Fantasy Football Goon. And John might make a few of those if he can, but if not, he's only a phone call or call out away.
Right, I'll do my best. I know you and I have a lot going on this summer. Of course, I've got a big long vacation as well, Joe. A little live show from Bears camp next weekend.
Yeah, the Goon and Tooch going to Bears training camp next week.
Right, and other Bears barroom personalities will be there as well. So definitely look for that live stream. We'll tweet it out when that will be going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again to everyone for tuning in to the Fantasy Football Goon podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter and Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, and make sure you visit us on fantasyfootballgoon.com. John, thanks as always for joining me, bud. I appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And don't forget to check out bearsbarroom.com for good articles, good Bears content, our podcast, Box Office Bros podcast as well.
You can also follow them at Bears Barroom.
We'll see you next time. We'll be in the AFC South, right, Joe?
AFC South, man. Lots to talk about there, too. God bless America, God bless football, and let's kick some ass.
See you next time.